Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. Let's do it. Let's get to it. Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast. And of course, I'm your host, John June, and we got a solo pod today. Greg is on vacation for a wedding, so it'll be off-season vibes here for these next two episodes. So we're going to slow the pace down a little bit. It's been pretty busy here on the feed between divisional breakdowns, positional breakdowns, did a mock draft, even threw out some tips for season-long for managers for season-long leagues. So we also did the what could go right and what could go wrong, which is always an interesting show to do because we see the other sides of the spectrum, see what it could look like when you look at the range of outcomes for a player in terms of, hey, if these particular set of circumstances happen, like this could go right, this is what could go right for this player, or vice versa, and is what could go wrong. And so, we try to be open-minded, so that's always a good exercise that we do here on the show to just kind of keep us grounded so we're never getting too high, too low. But, we have to discuss some of this news that's come down. So starting first with Travis Etienne, suffered a Liz Frank injury in Monday's preseason game against the New Orleans Saints, and he's out for the 2021 season. So that's a major blow to obviously his fantasy value and for this year, but presumably what could have been a huge weapon in the Jacksonville Jags offense, which if you watched on Monday, looked like it could have used some help for sure. So, definitely a discussion worth having, but we'll table that for another day. James Robinson, the hero from last year, was a top 7 running back in PPR leagues, vaults into my personal top 20 of running backs. And you could even make the argument he deserves to be higher. I just definitely believe that I don't think that he'll get as high as he was last year when you see the competition that he's going to have for this, for finishing that high this year with CMC and Saquon coming back from injury, a talented rookie entering the fold in Najee Harris, all these talented second-year backs and Jonathan Taylor, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins, Antonio Gibson. You get my point. He'll be a workhorse, and I'm comfortable with him as my RB2. So in that top 20 range is where I'm looking at, probably definitely ahead of a Mike Davis for me. Staying with that same game, New Orleans Saints versus the Jacksonville Jags, let's talk about the Saints side. Jameis Winston he's got to be the QB1 for the Saints, especially after this performance he put out on the, in the second preseason game for the New Orleans Saints, overtaking the spot which was held empty by Drew Brees. And so Jameis Winston, who's Greg's sleeper, comes in to potentially be the guy here. I mean, if you watch that game, you read the reports coming out of New Orleans, it seems like he's pretty much locked that spot up. And so absolutely looking to Jameis as a potential, QB2 in Superflex leagues. But like Greg mentioned earlier, a sleeper where is if I'm, drafting this loaded team, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, I'm going to scoop up a Jameis Winston with my last pick potentially. Maybe you could start him week 1. That game against the Green Bay Packers has a high total, so it's definitely within the range of outcomes that he could have a good game, especially if he's, Alvin Kamara is going to be that main weapon. And let's talk about another guy that will be in that conversation, and that's Marquez Callaway. This was a guy that flashed last year at times. Actually, back when Elvin Ryan came on to do the divisional breakdown covering the New Orleans Saints, we talked about him being the number 1 guy after Michael Thomas and that he would beat out Traquan Smith for that number 2 spot. And now obviously being elevated to the number 1 spot here with Michael Thomas suffering the injury or having to have surgery on the ankle. So he's definitely looked like he accomplished that, or he's on his way for sure. Looks phenomenal in the preseason game. And granted, it is preseason, but we have to, we have to react to the information that we're getting, and we have to be able to sift through it and parse through it, right? And so when I watch him, just looking, first off, he made two ridiculous contested catches, both for touchdowns, deep down the field. He looked explosive. He looked more refined as a route runner than he did last year. And so those things, making plays and just combined with what I saw last year, he was a guy that was already on my radar. I'm all in on Marquez Callaway, and I'm saying all in by as all in as can be, but I'm buying what he's selling. I've moved him up inside my top 30 of wide receivers. I think he will be the number one option outside of Alvin Kamara. And speaking of that guy, Alvin Kamara, I am 100% back on board. I mean, I'm back. I can't help it. I'm moving Kamara up ahead of Saquon Barkley to my RB3, right behind of CMC and Dalvin Cook. I mean, you just watch the New Orleans Saints offense operating with Jameis Winston. It will be something similar to what we had with Drew Brees, where you have a pocket passer. Alvin Kamara can be utilized in a multitude of ways as a runner, as a receiver. And so I think that was always the risk for me, is what if Taysom wins the job, right? What if you just trust, Sean Payton just trusts Taysom Hill? What if he wins that job and we get some of what we got last year, where you get some inconsistency? But I think this year, especially with Michael Thomas being out, these targets being available to him, I think Alvin Kamara is back to the moon here. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here. I'm like, this is a guy that could very easily on any given year be the RB1. And so getting this opportunity where the pass game plays are going to be there for him, the opportunities in the pass game are going to be there for him. I think that's what you want in PPR leagues. I mean, half PPR, maybe there's that conversation, but I think I would, with the risks that are there with Saquon Barkley, I've got to take Alvin Kamara, the talent, the player, the scheme, higher than Saquon Barkley, just based on the risk that's associated with it. But still on board with Saquon Barkley. Y'all know that. Rest assured, we're okay. But let's talk about the guy who's backing up Alvin Kamara at the running back position. And for a long time, we thought it was Latavius Murray. You could almost cut and paste that from year to year. But they went out, they signed Devontae Freeman, which, I always say, don't believe what coaches say, believe what they do, or believe what organizations do. They went out, they got another running back in Devontae Freeman. Tells you that they probably didn't really trust Latavius Murray this year. And if you've watched, Latavius Murray looked like he struggled a little bit during preseason, as did Devontae Freeman. But someone who's impressed is running back Tony Jones. He's a second-year player. He's been given every opportunity to win this backup running back job, which we know has value, both standalone value as well as enormous upside value if something were to ever happen to Alvin Kamara, which, knock on wood, never want that to happen. But we've seen that when this offense goes through Kamara, like it really drives through him, where he's getting 20 to 25 touches a game, that he has a tendency to break down near the end of the season, or at some point during the middle of the season. So Tony Jones is probably just became one of the most valuable commodities in fantasy football right now. So go out if you have Alvin Kamara, or if you're just looking, you have an extra bench spot and you're just looking for somebody to stash, Tony Jones would probably be the guy for me. Another stash, but this is more of a dynasty play. Wide receivers turned tight end, Jawan Johnson. He's still listed as a wide receiver on some formats. He's got that dual wide receiver tight end flexibility on Sleeper. To me, this guy, I mean, he was one of the top receivers in my prospect model, my wide receiver prospect model. And, a lot of that had to do with his size and his athleticism. But if you really look at the place where he landed, New Orleans, I mean, that's a sweet spot for him, potentially, obviously knowing Sean Payton and what he could potentially do with him. And, obviously at the time they had Drew Brees, so it was an intriguing move. But then I had him on a lot of dynasty leagues, so I had been paying attention, and he had been moved to tight end, and they had talked about that late last season. And this guy was playing in the preseason game with the ones, it was almost exclusively on third down and in passing situations, but he was a guy that was playing those snaps. He was getting those targets. And so from a dynasty perspective, I'm going to want him on my roster because, he could potentially be gold one day, especially we know how barren the tight end position is. We've seen the success stories of a guy like Darren Waller converting from wide receiver to tight end. I think Juwan Johnson from a body type and athleticism standpoint, he fits that profile to a T. So let's change gears a little bit here. So we have some news related to running backs, and Darrell Henderson suffered a thumb injury, expected to be okay for week 1. The Rams do end up ensuring their running back position by adding former New England Patriots first-round pick Sony Michel via trade of some late-round picks. And so we always felt as if, I remember saying it on this show when we're talking about the NFC West, that Darrell Henderson hasn't had many games where he's led he's had 20 plus carries, and after he did, he tended to break down. So you always had this inkling that the Rams would address the running back position, or it would never truly be just Darrell Henderson's job. So they add Sony Michel here. I think that this doesn't knock Darrell Henderson down a ton. Probably knocks him down into the RB30 range, but Sony Michel is a guy that he actually looked decent during his time in New England throughout training or throughout the preseason. Most recently, I'm speaking of. So he seems to be healthy. He seems to have a little bit of juice to him. So the Rams running back situation is probably one I'm staying clear of, not one I really want to try to invest in and try to figure out on a week-to-week basis. Obviously, there's always a price on a player. Sony Michel, if you have your drafts, he's out there sitting on waivers, so there's no harm in adding him and seeing what potentially becomes of it, especially week 1 against the Bears. You see what happens. You see what the utilization's like. If you don't like it, you can cut him loose. But let's go to Sony Michel's former team and talk about the New England Patriots there. But before we talk about the running backs, let's get into the quarterbacks a little bit. And so Cam Newton, the New England Patriots, Cam Newton and the New England Patriots basically had a miscommunication on COVID protocols for players that are traveling away from the team or the area with which the team resides. And so because of this, Cam can't be with the team for 5 days as he has to, quarantine as per these NFL protocols. And so what this ends up doing is opening up a window here for Mac Jones to come in and potentially take this starting job. And so obviously, if you listen to me in the offseason talking dynasty, you understand that I'm a believer in Mac Jones. I'm on record as saying I think all 5 of these quarterbacks will be very good quarterbacks in the NFL, will make it to their second contract. And so Mac Jones, to me, like I had said in the offseason, I think one of the perfect fits was this New England Patriots team, this New England Patriots organization, because he kind of fit what they were looking for in a pocket passer. They tried to do the thing with Cam last year. It didn't really work out all that much, but I think Mac Jones really reminds, I'm not saying he's Tom Brady, but when you look at how the style with which they play, he's closer to Tom Brady than he is Cam Newton. And so, I think that it's going to be rough for him as a rookie, especially without the rushing upside. So I'm not really interested in Mac Jones, but let's talk about what it potentially does for the other players on this team, right? Like, I think Jacoby Myers is that much more interesting because this is going to be like a real offense that actually throws the football. And when they do throw it, they're quality targets. And so I think Jacoby Myers is a player that has always intrigued. He intrigued me last year with Cam Newton. And I think with Mac Jones potentially being the starter, not going to put anything in stone yet. It's Belichick. You can never be too sure, but seems like it's leaning that way according to beat reporters in New England, especially with the performance that Mac Jones has had as of late. So I think it's also good for a player like Nelson Aguilar, who can take advantage of some of these deep targets. And I also think it's good for the running game, right? Damian Harris, I've said this, I'm on record as saying this, that I think that these running backs can actually breathe because Cam Newton is not going to take away some of these rushing touchdown opportunities. He's not going to take, there's still a possibility. I have a conspiracy theory that the Patriots could do some red zone quarterback situation. It's Bill Belichick. Nothing is out of the clear yet until we see it. But I think that these rushing touchdowns are going to be available to Damian Harris now and these big time opportunities. But I also think that Ramondre Stevenson, who has looked really good in the preseason, gets the biggest bump here with the Sony Michel news. And it's not out of the realm of possibility that whether by performance or injury, that he could be the Patriots starting running back at some point this season or for Dynasty some point next season. So just be on the lookout for that. Again, if you have an extra roster spot right now, just Ramondre Stevenson is not a bad person to add. He's not a bad player to add. So I would definitely look into that. But let's get out of New England. Let's go take a look at another quarterback situation that seems to have been decided, and that's Teddy Bridgewater gets the nod over Drew Lock. What it means for the Denver Broncos, I'm on record as saying I don't think that there's a vastly big difference between these two players and what they do for the Broncos. I think ultimately it's a wash. It's probably, with Drew Lock, you're probably going to be subjected to higher variance, right? You might have these, really explosive touchdown plays, but you might also have these really boneheaded interceptions or turnovers. And so I think you are just constantly riding this roller coaster with Drew Lock, whereas with Teddy Bridgewater, it's just going to be a steady ride and you know what you're going to get. And so I think with this team, the way it's set up, it's going to have a strong running game. It's got good weapons. I think Teddy Bridgewater can kind of manage this situation. Warren Sharp, who obviously, if you listen to this show, you know that I'm a huge proponent of his work, and I obviously use Sharp Football Stats for a ton of my research here, and so for in-season stuff. And so one of the things that he said was that Teddy Bridgewater went from the hardest pass defense schedule last year to the easiest this year with the Denver Broncos. And so there's that going for them. And so I think between Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Noah Fant, who seems to be dealing with an injury right now, so something to monitor there. Put Albert O on your radar. But I think it's definitely something to be mindful of when you are in your drafts, or Teddy Bridgewater is the starting quarterback, and maybe you can expect some better play week to week from these weapons, and that's probably what it is. And you're maybe not going to get the high upside on a week to week basis, but I think it's probably better for this offense as a whole. Maybe converting first downs more often, which puts Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon in more opportunities to score. So something to think about that way. Staying on the quarterback position, Dak Prescott, he's returned to practice. Obviously, he's been dealing with that tendonitis, and I think it was his elbow or his arm. But either way, he's returned to practice, seems to be close to 100%. So no concern there. There was never really a concern. So keep drafting Dak Prescott as a top 5 or 6 quarterback. And that there ends the news. I'm going to drink some water, so excuse me. And so we enter football season, right? And because we have to react to this news, we spent so much time in prognostication mode where we're guessing, we like this team drafted this player for that reason, or they signed this player for this reason, or like this is what they're going to do. And so we have some idea of what's happening based on what's going on in preseason, reports out of camp, depth charts, all these different pieces of information, injuries, all these things we have to react to, which means football season is upon us. So make sure you come prop up with Thrive Fantasy. And with Thrive, you eliminate all the countless hours of research and focus only on the top tier athletes who have the biggest impact on the game. Choose 10 out of the 20 available player props to build your lineup, and each prop is assigned a fantasy value for both the over and the under based on how likely it is to hit. Thrive has over $140,000 in guaranteed prizes for NFL Week 1 and has awarded over $4 million. Thrive's featured $100,000 guaranteed contest is $20 to enter, and first place takes home $20K. And if you go deposit that $20 and you use promo code FFDX, they will and sign up today, you will receive $100 instant first deposit match of up to $100. So again, this contest only $20. You enter it for $20, you get another free $20. Sounds like a deal to me. So make sure you download the Thrive Fantasy app on the App Store or the Google Play Store as well, or by visiting www.thrivefantasy.com. Sign up and prop today. Make sure you use promo code FFDX. So now that we've paid the bills, players that I'm heating up on, let's do a fantasy heat check. And so players I'm heating up on, players I'm cooling down on. But before we do that, just want to remind all the lovely people that are listening or watching, just make sure you subscribe to the show, right? Helps us out a ton, but also keeps you in the loop when we're going to get it, when a new episode comes out, when new shows come out, and whether you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on podcast, just make sure you subscribe. And also leave us some comments in the some reviews in the comments. Rate the review, like the show, whatever you want to do. But we just want to hear from the fans and hear from the hashtag DX tribe on what y'all are thinking. Are y'all excited for this fantasy season? How are we doing? Just all of it. So let's jump into this fantasy heat check, though. Players I'm heating up on. And so before I say this, you guys obviously, you see the Jets paraphernalia in the back of behind me, right? I got the Curtis Martin hanging up in the back over there to my left. But I try to keep the bias off the show. I think I do a pretty decent job at it. Corey Davis, and I'm going to throw in an honorable mention for Zach Wilson. Two players that I'm heating up on. And Corey Davis, I was constantly scooping him up as a wide receiver 4 or 5. I think we had done a mock draft, and I had talked about scooping up Corey Davis and Elijah Moore. But I had said this, many times. I started out believing Denzel Mims would lead the team in targets. Obviously, that was a long time ago. But you look at Corey Davis, the year he had last year, he was really good, averaging over 15 yards a catch, had almost a 1,000-yard season. I think we had talked about Corey Davis last week or doing the wide receiver breakdown show. But he's a guy that is going to lead this team in targets. We've seen through 2 preseason games. He is, no question, Zach Wilson's number 1 target, number 1 receiver. He's the first read. They have a ton of chemistry together, and they've just been working at it. So Corey Davis, he's a guy that, while I was already relatively high on, I think we have to adjust the price because he was going in a range where he was going with guys that are the number 2 or number 3 even wide receivers on their team, where he should be going with the guys that are the number 1 wide receiver or the number 2 wide receiver in a really pass-heavy offense. So I've gone ahead and I've moved him up into my top 20, my top 26 or my top 28. So he's inside my top 30, whereas before he was just outside he was my wide receiver 39 before that. So he's moved up a decent amount here, and that's just to make sure that we're getting him on our rosters, right? So Corey Davis, he's going to be a target hog. This is something that I've genuinely thought about. I mean, what's going to be the difference between a guy like, Corey Davis and a guy like Allen Robinson, right? Like if Corey Davis gets the target volume that a guy like Allen Robinson gets, it's not out of the realm of possibility that he could put up or have a similar production in a PPR league. And maybe he's a discounted Allen Robinson, right? I mean, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that, hey, go out and trade Corey Davis for Allen Robinson in all your leagues or Allen Robinson for Corey Davis. But what I'm trying to say is just don't think about the player or as much as the situation that he might be in. Just look at what the peripherals might look like, and the target volume is definitely something that's going to be there for Corey Davis. And if you look at the quarterback situation, that's also something that would be there for Corey Davis as well. Zach Wilson looks every bit the part of an NFL quarterback, and it seems like so far the Jets have made the right decision here with this pick. I mean, like I said, I don't think there was a wrong decision to make. I think all of these guys was pretty good. I mean, Mac Jones at 2 would have been probably the wrong decision, and maybe I'll have to eat crow for that one day. But I think that Zach Wilson looks every bit the part of the number 2 overall pick. Has not batted an eye. He has not flinched. Has not had a deer in headlights moment. Hasn't even had an interception or a ball that makes you think like, oh, that should be an interception, or he got lucky that wasn't an interception. So I think he looks every bit the part, and that gives me confidence that Corey Davis is somebody that I want on my fantasy teams, as is Zach Wilson. He's definitely in Superflex League, somebody that I think you should be looking to, and somebody that I think will be, I said this before, that will have streamable weeks at some point during the season. Now, another player that I'm heating up on, I don't know if this really counts, but I feel like because of the Elijah Moore ends up with the Jets, I don't talk about this guy as much. Rondale Moore, man. You guys, if you've been listening to this show all preseason, you know that has been my guy. He was my number 2 wide receiver pre-draft. I ended up dropping him down after the draft because of the draft capital and some of where these other guys went. But I still have this affinity, this love for Rondale Moore. And you look at what he's doing in this Arizona Cardinals offense. And like I said on draft day, this is a perfect fit for him in terms of the team that he's going to. I think that he's going to play that slot receiver role very well. We've already seen him as a dual threat weapon, both used on in the screen game, deep down the field, on jet sweeps, on reverses. Like Rondale Moore is going to be all over the field. And so in PPR leagues, he makes the perfect high upside type of flex play on a week-to-week basis. And just, the upside is even there just because he's playing with Kyler Murray. The potential that AJ Green, he's up there. We've seen him suffer from injuries before. So, he could easily, there's a path to him becoming the number 2 receiver on this team, even without the injuries. But I believe that Rondale Moore is that good. And so he's a guy that I've been picking up on my fantasy teams because when I'm honestly, especially in these PPR leagues, Rondale Moore is almost as valuable, if he's more valuable than some of these running backs that you're taking at that point, right? Like Rondale Moore versus Gus Edwards. Obviously, we know what Gus Edwards is going to do, but in a PPR league, Gus Edwards is going to get you 5 to 7 points, right? Whereas like Rondale Moore could very easily exceed that. And then the opportunities that he's going to have to be a weapon deep down the field, playing an explosive offense with Kyler Murray, like I'd much rather have Rondale Moore in my flex. So Rondale Moore is a guy I'm going to continue to scoop up. I've got him inside my top 40 wide receivers. I'm just going to continue to grab him there. Another guy that I'm heating up on, Mecole Hardman. We talked about him I know I definitely talked about him in the Chiefs when breaking down the Chiefs with my guy Mike Hicks and doing the AFC West breakdown. And I said that I would take Henry Ruggs over him, and I think I'm still on that. But Mecole Hardman is somebody that is definitely creeping up on my radar. I've been in some leagues with some pretty sharp people, and they've drafted him pretty high. And this all comes with the news that has come out that recently that Mecole Hardman has basically been a complete different guy, right? He's much better as a receiver. He's less of just a gadget player, return guy. He's actually playing like a receiver. And there was a game against the preseason game against the Arizona Cardinals where Mecole Hardman saw 5 targets from Patrick Mahomes, and these were like quality targets. Some of them were, I think one of them was an end zone target, but these are the targets that matter. And Patrick Mahomes could very easily be a guy that is like Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, get the ball to the running back. But he seems to be building a trust and a rapport with Mecole Hardman. And sometimes it takes these guys a little bit longer, right? Mecole Hardman, third year wide receiver in the NFL. We often, I think we're a little bit spoiled because we see guys like Justin Jefferson or even Odell Beckham or even CeeDee Lamb last year come into the NFL and have success right away. And so we expect that, and that's all, and that completely trumps the what we had previously been the thought process that we had previously had, which was wide receivers take 2 to 3 years to break out. And so Mecole Hardman here, he is that 3-year breakout potentially, and he's attached to an all-world quarterback in Patrick Mahomes. And you guys know, you all out there listening, watching, know how I feel about Patrick Mahomes in the season that he might have, and you all know how Greg feels, obviously, about Patrick Mahomes and the season that he could have this year. So I think Mecole Hardman makes a ton of sense if you are picking at the end of your drafts. Again, looking for that flex spot, looking for somebody to put on your bench. Mecole Hardman makes a ton of sense. Another guy I'm going to throw out there, maybe in deeper leagues, we might have some player fatigue, some name fatigue when it comes to this player, but Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Obviously, I know you probably just got an upset stomach or something like that, but he's been having a pretty good camp from all reports. He's been the number 2 receiver, it seems, opposite Davante Adams with Randall Cobb in the slot. And the Packers have played 2 preseason games. They have not played their starters. MVS has not played. And so if you want to go down narrative street, contract year. So you put all this together, the reports coming out of camp, the contract, the fact that you've got a player who's potentially motivated, because the problem is not that Marquez Valdes-Scantling can't play. The problem has been that Marquez Valdes-Scantling suffers from focus issues, drops, right? So if he's motivated to fix some of those things and he plays again, going to that same thing where plays with a talented quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, plays opposite a weapon in Davante Adams, which, keeps defensive coordinators up at night. Oh, Davante Adams, Aaron Jones, Aaron Rodgers, like MVS is going to have opportunities here, and he doesn't need a whole lot of them to bring back fantasy production. So I think he's going to be a guy that we're going to use at some points during the year as a weekly flex option, as that nitro button to get some high upside, high octane offense in our lineups. And so he's a guy that I'm heating up on. But let's move on to the players I'm cooling down on. And really, I've only got 2 guys here. This one hurts, but it doesn't, because it's the truth. And it's Michael Carter. I think just 2 weeks ago we did the running back positional breakdowns, or a week ago did the running back positional breakdowns, and Michael Carter was a sleeper for me. And when I look at the situation, I still believe in Michael Carter, still believe in the talent. But if you just look at how the Jets are using him and some of the reports out of camp, is that he's 3rd on this depth chart behind Ty Johnson, behind Tevin Coleman. Now, he's a guy that I still want on my rosters. I just don't want him on my roster right now because of the price that it costs to get him. He's going off the board in the top 36 running backs. I don't think he'll start out the season as a top 36 running back. He's honestly a guy that people might draft early, get a little bit frustrated, and they're going to need some spots. The Jets have a week 6 bye. He could very well end up getting dropped at that point, or he could be a buy low candidate. And he reemerges as this value or this buy candidate later in the season. And so Michael Carter is a guy I'm cooling down on. If you are looking for a Jets running back, it is Ty Johnson. You have to be scooping up Ty Johnson, and he doesn't cost you anything. I've been scooping up Ty Johnson in like the 14th, 15th round of drafts. It's very, his cost might go up a little bit because people might be a little bit on to the fact that, hey, this seems to be Ty Johnson's, he's going to get that opportunity out the gate. But if you have an opportunity to scoop up Ty Johnson late in drafts, you can make sure you make that move. Another player that I'm cooling down on, this is actually the last player that we'll discuss this evening, but Jamar Chase. The talented rookie. He's been struggling in camp. There have been some reports about lack of separation, and then he's had some drops. Didn't have I watched him in a preseason game, and he, suffered from some drops there as well. So there's just some I'm not out on Jamar Chase. I'm just cooling my jets on Jamar Chase. Whereas I thought that he could, come in and be this like top 25 wide receiver right away. I think we're gonna, pump the brakes on that, lower the expectations there, let him get drafted as that top 25 wide receiver. And again, like Michael Carter, let him get dropped a little bit later on. But I'm going to be in wait and see mode with Jamar Chase. And I'm, he's kind of like a stash guy for me. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, that is all we have for this episode. Try to keep it short and sweet. Told you we had off-season vibes. Catch us on Saturday for the next episode. And make sure, like I said, you subscribe so you get all those notifications and you know exactly when it drops. So everybody, we appreciate y'all. Appreciate y'all for listening. Make sure you follow the show at FF Diagnostics. Make sure you follow me at JR Football Nerd. And again, appreciate y'all. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And we will talk to y'all later. Peace.